So written by someone who is a very clever author, or someones who are very clever authors, but when? Probably late first or early second century, and that's the general consensus, and I think that's right. There are some people that want to date the gospel a little earlier, some people a little later, but the main facts are that it seems to know the synoptic gospels. Now, exactly how it knows the synoptic gospels is a matter of some debate, and whether it was developed at the same time that the synoptic gospels were being written and therefore has some sort of interaction with them at different stages, possible. But I think at the end of the day, the Gospel of John knows the Gospel of Mark and knows the Gospel of Luke, maybe even knows the Gospel of Matthew, and uses elements from them in very creative ways. If that is correct, and since I'm saying it, it must be right. If that's correct, then the Gospel is probably later than 90. Which is probably 1995 when the Gospel of Luke was probably written. Mark, written about 70, Matthew, 80s, Luke in the 90s. But can we have a terminus ante, a date before which the Gospel was written? Some people have argued in the past there's a little papyrus fragment in Manchester, England, the John Rylands Library, P52 it's called, that has a little bit of text from John 18, and that gives us a terminus ante, a date before which the gospel was written. Why? Because the original editors of the text said, oh, this looks like papyri that we're familiar with from around 125 to 150. So that's when we're going to date it. This is a very technical bit of business, papyrological dating of manuscripts. And contemporary experts in the field say, nah, it's not quite so certain. It could be as late as the late second or third century. So that doesn't provide a really firm terminus ante. Irenaeus, the famous heresiologist who wrote against the Gnostics around 180, explicitly cites the gospel and makes a big deal of it. So we know that by that time in the Latin Church of the West, but also written by someone who was a member of the church in the East in Smyrna. Irenaeus knows this gospel and reveres it. And there's other evidence from that period that is known and revered in the circles that Irenaeus was criticizing, the Gnostics. There are lots of things that sound like echoes of the gospel in earlier second century literature. But are they echoes of the gospel? They're not citations. They're not exact words from a particular and obviously recognizable source within the gospel. They're themes for the most part. Well, that's debated, but in any case, they're not citations. These start appearing as early as around 110 with the letters of Ignatius of Antioch, and maybe even in Justin Martyr, although not quite so clearly by the middle of the century. So there are a number of things that suggest that the gospel is around and in circulation by the second quarter of the second century at least, and that again pushes it to the late first or early second.